Sup, and welcome to a random review, where today I am discussing one of the very first films that was released in theaters in 2024, Night Swim from Blumhouse Productions, which was directed by Bryce McGuire and stars Wyatt Russell. This is a horror movie about a family of four that moves into a suburban home that has a swimming pool attached to it, and over the course of the movie, the family begins to realize that that pool is haunted, or possessed, or evil, or something, and that they're gonna have to deal with it before it destroys their family forever. So, this was a very stupid movie that I saw, and I try to never ever check reviews before I see a movie in theaters, because I like going into them with as few preconceived notions about them as possible, but I was reasonably certain that if I had checked the reviews for Night Swim ahead of time, that I would have found that critics were blasting this thing, because not only is this a silly concept for a movie, it's called Night Swim, which is not a very creative title. So I was not expecting wonders from this, and yet I went to go see it anyway. And you might be wondering, why? Why did I go out and see this movie that I thought was going to be dumb? Well, I'll tell you. The reason I did is because during the coronavirus pandemic that hit America in 2020, movie theaters were shut down for over a year, and movies stopped coming out for them. And there was a real, legitimate fear that many people had, including myself, that the pandemic was going to eradicate the movie theater industry forever. Because the pandemic struck at like the exact moment that all these big streaming services were coming out and putting out movies on their own platforms. And so it felt like it could have been the perfect storm to kill it. And so for over a year, everyone was forced to watch movies exclusively inside their own houses, and it sucked. And I remember thinking at the time that if we could ever get out of quarantining, and if the movie theater industry could somehow just hold on a little longer without any customers and survive, that I was going to see as many movies in a movie theater as I possibly could for the rest of my life. And I've held true to that. And nowadays, anytime there is any movie that I am even remotely interested in seeing, I will see it in a theater, because it's not only an experience that I love and adore, it's an experience that I don't take for granted anymore. If the COVID-19 vaccine had not come out as quickly as it had, if it had taken 2 full years to come out instead of 1, it is entirely possible that the movie theater industry as we know it simply would not exist anymore, or would not be relevant anymore. And that would be terrible. It took a miracle of science and engineering for movie theaters to still exist. And therefore, a movie like Night Swim that prior to 2020 I never ever would have gone out to see in a theater, now I was like, Night Swim? Sure, why the fuck not? I'll go see Night Swim. It'll probably be lame, but hey, it's a movie, and I love seeing movies with other people, even if they're lousy. And I did. So anyway, Night Swim. Night Swim is the kind of movie that you don't have to invest too much of your brain power into analyzing, because there's really not much to it. The vast majority of the runtime is spent watching people swim in this pool, often at night, and the whole time they're swimming, you're just waiting for something bad to happen to them. This is kind of like if Paranormal Activity took place in a pool and wasn't a found footage movie. The film has a couple decent things going for it. For one thing, it's shot well. There are lots of underwater shots and wading in water shots, and they look pretty good. Another positive is that because almost the entire movie takes place in or around this pool, there's a decent sense of dread that permeates it, because you do get a sense that something bad could happen at like any moment, even if people aren't necessarily in the pool, which is good. What's weak about the movie, though, unfortunately, is that it's just not very scary. Night Swim is 90 minutes long without credits, so it's pretty short, which it needed to be because this concept is only so sustainable for a variety of reasons. But in order to pad out the runtime, whenever people get in the pool, and whenever the movie enters something bad is about to happen mode, the build-up to that bad thing happening is consistently way too long. There were several instances where it felt like I was waiting forever for something to happen. And then when something finally did happen, all that happened was a jump scare that wasn't executed very well. Like, the inescapable problem with having a horror movie about a suburban swimming pool is that a suburban swimming pool isn't all that inherently frightening. And so, the movie tries to compensate for this by having the pool lights flicker on and off sometimes, and having strange voices whisper to people as they're swimming. And the cherry on top is that at various points, a monster appears in the pool out of nowhere, but the monster in this movie looks very goofy and uninspired. And so even when it shows up, it never really registered as an effective jump scare for me because I couldn't get past how ridiculous it looked. And so, for all the build-up the movie was putting into these scares, the payoff never felt worth it. It doesn't help either that while the characterization in this movie is actually not that bad, the characters commit the cardinal sin of horror movies, which is that they keep returning to the pool and keep investigating it whenever a strange noise comes from it, even after they've learned that there's something clearly horribly wrong with the pool. And so, when one of the characters invariably gets their life threatened because they were like, sure, I'll dangle myself precariously over the pool, what could go wrong? I couldn't even be scared for them because I was just annoyed with them for putting themselves into that position in the first place, like the dumbest people on earth. What was disappointing about this movie was that for a split second, it actually flashed a kernel of potential. The father of the family in this movie is a former baseball player who is dealing with a serious, life-threatening ailment. And it turns out that for all the weirdness that goes on with the pool water begins to cure him and make him healthier, way more than it should have been doing. And so the movie explores the idea that the bad, evil things that this pool was doing, it was doing for his sake, as like a sacrifice to make him better. And it's an interesting idea, but the problem with it is that the rules of the water in the pool never felt like they had much consistency, or were at all fleshed out well. Because there are multiple instances where this pool that's supposedly trying to help this guy and save his life from this ailment attacks him out of nowhere and even tries to drown him. So it felt like the logic of the pool was just whatever the movie needed it to be at any moment. Sometimes the pool can't do anything unless you're in it, and sometimes it can reach out to people and affect them vicariously. And so, any kind of deepness that this film could have had, it throws it away. And it was hard not for me to conclude that the reason this film didn't invest more into solidifying what we were seeing was because the powers that be didn't think it was necessary to do so, because this is a movie about a killer swimming pool, so why even bother? And fair enough, but that doesn't mean this still couldn't have been better. That said, I am willing to extend a little bit of charity to Night Swim, if only because making a horror movie about a suburban swimming pool is not exactly easy, and I at least appreciate that they attempted to make something original. I don't think the concept is entirely impossible, though. I think you could make a great swimming pool horror movie if the movie was about a public pool, and if the main characters were small children who were afraid of swimming to the deep end. I think that could really work, because in that scenario, as an audience, we would be able to recognize the inherent danger of a small child that isn't good at swimming being out of their depths. And that's regardless of if a monster would then show up or not. That's something that we could relate to and find scary on a personal level. It's like, the reason that a movie like Jaws was terrifying was because when the shark was attacking people, those people were stranded in the ocean where there was no way they could possibly escape. And so those people were incredibly vulnerable to us. In the same way that seeing an inexperienced kid paddle out to the deep end of a pool would be nerve-wracking because we would immediately understand the vulnerability of that character. Whereas in Night Swim, the setting is a backyard pool. And while this is not to say that nothing bad ever happens in backyard pools, they don't connote vulnerability and danger for the people who use them. Case in point, when the characters in this movie are fighting for their lives because the pool water has gone after them, as ridiculous as that sounds, you're never as fearful for them as you could be because the pool they're in is so small and so shallow that the whole time they're struggling, you're identifying that they only have to go like a couple feet to the left to just get out of the pool, and then they'd be safe. And so you never feel like they're as screwed as they would be when they're struggling if they were, say, the people who were in the ocean in Jaws. If you watch Night Swim, the whole time you'll be watching it, you're going to be fighting the default impulse to not view what's happening as frightening. The concept of it is a detriment more than it's an asset. And that's the opposite of what you want when you're making a horror movie. Overall, Night Swim is basically what I thought it would be. If you're a big fan of paranormal activity type movies that are heavy on jump scares, or if you're in the mood for a horror movie that's not too scary, like you just want to watch one for the sake of watching one, if that makes any sense, then I could totally see some people getting enjoyment out of this. If you watch a lot of horror movies though, I really don't think this is going to impress you. It's not god-awful. Like I said, if you watch a lot of horror movies, you will see so much worse than this, but it's not very good either. This is the kind of movie that I think most people would immediately forget about within a few days of seeing it if it didn't have such an off-the-wall premise. But it does have that premise, so if nothing else, if you see this, it might stick with you that you once watched a movie about a killer swimming pool. So, I give Night Swim from 2024 a flimsy 4.62 out of 10. If you're looking for a better horror movie about haunted water, I recommend a 2002 Japanese movie called Dark Water. It's about a single mother whose apartment gets possessed by water, and it covers a lot of the same territory as Night Swim, but is a much more intriguing and complete film, in my opinion. Or, you could watch Dark Water and Night Swim back to back and complete one of the most specific horror movie double features imaginable, if you're into that sort of thing.